Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Spring Heel Jack. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Ken. Thank you very much for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I'm very, very excited to have you here. But before we talk about why you're here, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. You were born in LA and went to Catholic school from K to 12. You discovered your love for playing music at a very early age. Um, You went and you studied classical piano from 7 to 18 after failing spectacularly at the violin, which I might add is very easy to do because, in my opinion, the violin is one of the hardest instruments in the world to play. Um, and you got a guitar in seventh grade, taught yourself how to play, played in some bands throughout high school, and then you really started after high school. You played in a band at the local LA dive bar circuit. Um, Now, playing music is always something that's been very special to me. I've always been a big fan of playing music, and what really honed your love for wanting to play the guitar and wanting to write music and play shows.
It just felt like a really good expression of my emotions. I was a really emotional, kind of shitty teenager and didn't really express myself well. And writing music and playing music felt like a really good way to do that.
Mhm. I agree. I played in punk rock bands until I was like 24 years old, just out playing the most obtuse, odd three chords I could possibly play while screaming about how bad my heart hurts. So um, I definitely understand wanting to go out and play music, and I still love it to this day. But after the band parted ways, you took a little bit of a break from music and got into like nature, urbex photography, finding joy and freedom on the open road. Now, how far did you travel to do some of your photography?
Oh man, I have traveled in because I get essentially 4 days off a month from my day job. So I've traveled up to 6 hours away to get some of the shots that I've wanted. And I love it. I love those trips. It's just
What a
fantastic.
what a great feeling too when you take that whole drive and you get there and you actually capture the image that you want. Like, what an ultimate feeling of victory in those moments.
Oh yeah, yeah, I love it. It doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately. Sometimes you
Sure.
get there and the equipment doesn't work right or operator error with the equipment and it's like anything, it's hit or miss, but I got to see some really cool stuff doing that and I really enjoy it.
And that's awesome, man. And because of that, on one of these long trips, you listened to your first podcast and you thought it might be fun to give it a try. And the show has grown very quickly. You've been doing it ever since. And last summer, you started attempting to write fiction stories for your show and found that you greatly enjoy it. And that's probably like the passion you'll be pursuing for the foreseeable future. So um, you're listening to these podcasts and you decide, what, I'm going to try this out. What gave you the drive to say, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to create a podcast. I'm going to go out and have a good time.
You know, I just thought that it would be something that I would excel at. I didn't really have any experience with recording really anything. I recorded guitar tracks over things before, but usually whenever I'd been recorded, it's somebody else is doing it. And I had a laptop. I had spare time in the afternoon because I work overnight, so I figured I would give it a shot. And there was a learning curve at first, but I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad that I stuck with it because it turned out to be okay so far.
Yeah. Well, and the good thing, guys, you don't have to go far looking for these links because I have all the links down in the description below, as well as the social media links. So you can follow him on social media as well. So make sure you're subscribing to the podcast on the platform of your choosing, and make sure you're following him on social media to stay up to date with everything else he has coming up. Let us know what your favorite story of his is. Let us know what you think of the podcast down in the comments below as well. So, in order for you to do a horror podcast, or in order for doing stories of any type of science fiction, horror, thriller, horror had to start for you somewhere. So I want to go back to the past here for a little bit and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie, and Spring Heel Jack, your first horror movie was.
Scream, the original Scream.
What an amazing way to start your horror life. Whether you love or hate Scream, I've said it 1,000 times, one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. And it really did revitalize and rejuvenate the horror genre at a time where it was really starting to get stale. So, do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen it?
Oh man, I was watching it on TV with my dad. So it came out in what, 96?
Yes, sir.
So it had to have been, oh, I don't know, 98 or 99. So I was, hmm, math. I was 6 or 7, I think, when I first saw it.
And it's one of those movies that, especially as a 6 or 7 year old, trying to understand Ghostface,
Right.
and seeing essentially all the things you see in that movie, which it was cool, and like I hate to sound like such a geriatric person, but when that movie came out, like it was hit. It was cool. Like it was a cool horror wasn't cool before that for a lot of people. Scream came in and made horror cool. It made it cool to be a horror fan. And it's a movie that still to this day, they're still making sequels, even though we're kind of tied up in some bullshit with it right now. But
Yeah.
um, do you remember which scene it was from Scream that affected you the most?
Oh yeah, of course. It was when Kenny the cameraman ate shit. They were watching the live feed from inside of the house, and he's screaming at the TV at I believe it was Jamie Kennedy, the kid drunk sitting on the couch watching a horror movie, screaming at Jamie Lee Curtis in the horror movie to turn around, look behind her while Ghostface is standing behind him, and the scene is mirrored with Kenny and Gail in the van, and Ghostface is standing right behind him, as I said, while he's screaming exactly what's the scenes are mirroring each other is what I'm trying to say. I'm fumbling,
Yeah.
but yeah, I remember that scene well.
I've always said if there's a Kenny in a horror movie, he's gonna die. It doesn't
Oh yeah.
matter whether it's Boy Meets World, whether it's this, or he's a killer. Look at Terror Train. Kenny's the killer in that movie. Kenny's either a killer or a killie in every single horror movie that you watch. And every time I see a horror movie from a little kid, I was like, oh, yep, Kenny, he's done. He's dead. South Park really drive a stake into that. So, um,
Yes.
and that is one of the scenes where, and later on you get him on top of the van, when they're driving the van away, like where the
Yeah.
fuck is Benny, and it's one of those scenes that is really underrated because of how truly, this guy is innocent. This guy has nothing to do with anything. Say what you want about Stu and Billy's motives, but this guy really didn't do anything at all. So this just shows how truly unhinged and psycho that they all are. Um, so we know which scene affected you the most, but what would you say your favorite scene from the original Scream is?
Oh man, the wrap up scene where they're asking him they're asking Stu why he did it, and he gives that sarcastic peer pressure, man. And they're stabbing each other trying to set up the framing of the crime. I love that
Yeah.
scene.
Well, and again, this is where, because I've said this a lot on the podcast, but we often forget how monumental that moment truly is. Because the first time we had seen this movie, we just watched Billy Loomis die. Like we watched him die, and then we see him fumble down the stairs, and he still got the blood on him, and then we all go a little mad sometimes. You're like, wait a minute, especially as a kid, I just saw that guy die. How is he still alive?
Oh yeah.
So I think that this is one of the all-time greatest twists in horror because it was really unexpected the first time that we had seen it. So, we know that the Kenny kill was one that affected you a lot. That's one that really stuck with you. But would you say that's your favorite kill of the film, or is there another kill that kind of sticks with you too?
No, the Henry Winkler one was pretty memorable. That
The
one
Fonz, man.
oh yeah.
And what I love about the Fonz kill is just, for me, like you said, it's Henry Winkler. And when he opens up, and what a cool little Easter egg is when he opens up that closet door, there is a leather jacket in there as like an homage to the Fonz. But seeing the reflection in his eye is one that's
Hmm.
always stuck with me, a moment that has always stuck with me from this film.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And we talk about, we were just talking about a little bit ago, at the time of recording, there are 6 films in the Scream franchise. Probably, in my opinion, one of the most consistent horror franchises of all time. I don't think there's really a huge stinker in the whole franchise, but if you had to choose, what would you say your favorite film in the Scream franchise would be?
Definitely the first one.
Okay. I mean, I figured, but, I got to ask.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's so many of them and there's so much content with that franchise. It's I'm I'm not necessarily a fan of the more recent ones, but I am happy that they're still making content because obviously I'd rather have more horror content than less.
Yeah.
So I'm never going to disparage them for continuing with the franchise. I think that's great. It's just they kind of lost me after the trilogy was over, the
Hmm.
original trilogy.
And it's funny because I've always said part 4 is my least favorite. And I don't know if it's because of the love I had for the original trilogy. I don't know if it's because of the 2 fake outs at the beginning, which I'm really not a fan of. But there's just so much about that movie that I don't know. It doesn't do it for me. So I think I would agree with you on that. And one, obviously, like I said, it's super iconic. Definitely one of my favorite horror films of all time. But while we're talking about Scream, we talked about your first horror movie, but I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball at you here for a second.
Okay.
Um, we're talking about Scream being your first horror movie, and while we're on that subject, my little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Spring Heel Jack? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Halloween 4.
Oh, nice. The Return.
Yes.
And, not only is that the return of Michael Myers, but we also get the introduction into Jamie Lloyd, you
Yes.
know, one of the most fan favorite characters of the entire franchise, hands down, bar none. So,
Hmm.
um, in my opinion, that's one of the, 'cause I'm not a Halloween purist. I'm not a huge fan of the Halloween franchise. I came into that franchise really late. Um, I started off with Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Child's Play, and then I found Halloween later. So I always thought Halloween was kind of slow and boring after what I'd watched, but um, this has always been in my top five of the franchise. It's got a good pace to it. You got very likable characters throughout the movie. Um, we get old Ted Hollister getting killed for taking a piss in the bushes. There's
Hmm.
just so much about Halloween 4 that I absolutely adore. So, um, now, when we're talking the influence that these movies have on each other, it can't be understated. Scream starts with, quotes of Freddy Krueger. I'm sorry, quotes of Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. You get Wes Craven putting those into this meta universe. Do you think that movies like with Scream being your first horror movie, do you think that that's really impacted the type of writing and stuff that you do today?
No, I don't think so. I do more of a psychological type horror writing.
Okay.
I do less slasher writing, more failures of the human mind type of thing. Think
Which is
my
that?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think my writing style, I try to emulate Rod Serling, but it's big shoes to fill, and that's probably my biggest literary inspiration when I try to write.
Well, and to me personally, psychological horror and religious horror have always been the scariest for me. Um, when you get in my brain and you're making me really, really think about stuff and it's bringing that anxiety into me, that's always been something that's far more terrifying, in my opinion. So we know that you write for the podcast and you do your stories on the podcast. Any chance that we could ever get a novel or anything like that out of you?
Hopefully, it's in the works. I just need to carve out the time to do it. It's quite an undertaking. I've written novellas before. I've written 30,000 word novellas that I've read in the show, and they've been reasonably well received. A novel is in the works, but it's an undertaking.
It's definitely not easy.
No.
So I'm very excited to check out the novel and be able to get updates about it. And the best way to do that, guys, is by following him on social media. Like I said before, he'll keep you updated, subscribing to the podcast. He's going to be talking about it on there as well. Now, I've had an amazing time talking to you about your first horror movie, your favorite horror movie, and some of your writing as well. But before I let you go, we always bounce back to the same question. We're going to go back to the OG Scream. And what we're going to do here is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. But what we're doing here is strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, zero skulls being not effective, five being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of Scream be?
Oh man, probably 4 3/4,
Yeah,
if not five.
it's one of those movies that, like I said, even if you're not a fan of it, I don't think you can deny the impact that it's had on the horror genre. I mean, look at the movies that came out the 2 years before and the 2 years after Scream, and you'll really see how big of an influence it had. And we had other movies that came out that were in the same vein that were just so great. The I Know What You Did Last Summer's Valentine,
Oh
Urban
yeah.
Legend, all these movies that would have never happened had Wes Craven not came up with this idea of Scream. And I always even liken that back to Wes Craven's New Nightmare because he really dipped his toes in the meta pool with New Nightmare and then just dove right in with Scream. So because of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, horror became what it is today, and I really, really love that. So again, guys, I know I said it at the beginning and the middle. but we're at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I have all of Spring Heeled Jack's social media links down in the description and the podcast link. So, like I said, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast, following on social media so you can become a part of that family. I am so honored that I got the chance to do this. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Michael, who got us in contact with each other, I want to thank him. I know he's a big fan. So, for us to be able to do this together meant a whole lot to me. So, please don't go anywhere. I have a couple more questions for you. Um, Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Our links are down in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are. I will see you guys soon.